Child prodigies are as remarkable as they are rare. Psychology professor Joanne Ruthsatz spent nearly 2 decades assembling the largest ever research sample of these extraordinary children and offers a startling thesis. The book is called The Prodigy's Cousin: The Family Link Between Autism and Extraordinary Talent. And joining us now from The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio, the book's co-author, Joanne Ruthsatz, and in Washington, D.C., her co-author and daughter, Kimberly Stephens. And we're delighted to have both of you on TVO with us tonight. Joanne, to you first. You've been studying this, as we indicated, for a couple of decades. What got you interested in the first place?
Well, I was not interested in studying child prodigies. I was actually working with disabled children when a different researcher from another university put out an article that said to be exceptional at anything, all you had to do was start young and practice for a lot of deliberate hours. And it was kind of like insult to injury because I was working with severely disabled children. And so I came up with my own theory that said there are at least 3 variables that were going to predict someone's achievement rank, and that would be IQ, and it would be domain-specific skills, and practice time, certainly part of it. And while I was testing my theory out on the Cleveland Institute of Music and pitting them against high school self-selected band members, my husband came home with a national magazine with a cover of a child prodigy. And he said, if you're also interested in exceptional performers, how about this kid? And I thought, oh, this could be fascinating, because if I'm right, then he'll have an off-the-charts IQ, and his domain-specific skills will be perfect. He'll have perfect pitch, and his practice time has been limited. He's only 6 years old. And so I went down there to in the South, and I got to meet him, and I was testing him, and his IQ was above average for sure, but his working memory was exceptional. And it was during that time I was doing his working memory that he got tired of me, and he said, Miss Joanne, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? He said, I want to go to McDonald's. So I said, let me ask your mother. And she said, sure, we could go there. And just by chance, his only maternal cousin walked in with his mother. And as the 2 sisters talked, the teenage boy, who was the sister's oldest son, began to grunt and flap his hands. And when they left the table, the prodigy's mother said, my nephew is autistic. And I thought, what are the chances of having a prodigy that is so rare and a severely autistic child in the same family? And so I started to think about ways to explore that. And
that's when a light went on, I guess. Now, let me ask you with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. Your daughter, who's on the program with us tonight, is a Princeton and Harvard law grad. She a bit of a child prodigy, too?
No, it's totally different.
Okay, I get you. Kimberly, let's do the official question here to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. A child prodigy is what exactly?
So the typical definition of a child prodigy is an individual who reaches a professional level in a demanding field by adolescence. And the sort of hallmark is this really explosive development of talent at a young age. So imagine a kid who gets interested in physics, and next thing you know, they're writing for peer-reviewed journals, or picks up the violin, and before you know it, is performing with professional musicians or playing Carnegie Hall. So it's just this really incredible achievement.
There are many stories of many child prodigies in the book that you've done with your mom. Is there one that sticks out with you for any particular reason?
There's so many. I think one that comes to mind is Jonathan Russell, because I think his story really demonstrates how early on you can see the spark of what's going to be this really huge passion for these kids. So Jonathan is a musician, and even before he could talk, his mom would push him around in the stroller, and she would sing to him, and he would dictate song choice with a shake of his head. By the time he is 18 months, he can pick the sound of a violin out of an audio recording. And at the same age, he starts pointing out violins every time he sees them. So he says, violin, violin, violin. And at 3 years old, once he starts actually playing the violin, he's not just playing nursery rhymes, he's actually improvising on them, so adding his own spin to them. And that love for improvisation and composing, was so evident all throughout his life. He's now at NYU, and he's studying film scoring. And he actually describes his brain as like an internal iPod, but instead of playing songs that already exist, it's composing new music all the time, and it's pretty much involuntary. So, you know, this passion for music of his was evident almost from the cradle.
I know, Joanne, asking this kind of question in a way is like asking which of your children do you love the most, but let's try it anyway. Is there one of the stories in your book? You just told us one,
exactly.
Garrett James,
You
that
are
stands out.
asking me to pick a favorite. Let's see. They're all so incredible. It'd be so hard to pick one, but if I was going to say the one that changed my research line was the very first Prodigy I had. He was like a typical kid. He got done performing at a state fair at a huge audience, and he came up to me and he said, "Miss Joanne, do you want to play in the sandbox with me?" And I said, "Sure." So we were playing trucks, and he asked me to dance, and I also said it was going to be my claim to fame that I turned this young man down because now he is a national icon.
Do you have any other examples in your research where autism and child prodigy characteristics were in the family tree?
Over half the families have autistic individuals. Some of the families have multiple individuals with autism and a child prodigy.
So is it now an accepted bit of wisdom in your field that there is a definitive link between these two phenomena?
Well, it hasn't been replicated yet because prodigies are so rare to recruit. And so I think until it's replicated, it really won't get the respect.
Okay, Kimberly, one of the boys that you referred to in the book refers to a warehouse of a mind that he has. What's that a reference to?
That is a reference to his just phenomenal command of facts that he reads and is interested in. So this little guy, William, he was fascinated by books. By the time he was 4 months old, as soon as he could crawl, he would motor himself right to books. He started using his fingers to trace the letters. By the time he was 18 months old, he knew the alphabet, not just forward, but also backwards. He was spelling at 2 years, and that kind of memory and attention to detail is evident in everything he pursues, from maps to the periodic table. He just soaks information in and doesn't let it go.
Joanne, we not too long, actually I should say we do it every year. Every year we have a visit on our program by a member of our parliament named Mike Lake, who has an autistic son who I guess is about 17, 18 right now, and he is nonverbal. And this past year he came on and his dad wrote ZY on a piece of paper, and off he went to the races, writing the alphabet out in about 10 seconds backwards perfectly. Do we have any understanding of how that is? Because obviously I can't do that, you can't do that, but he could do that, and he's never said a word in his life. How's that possible?
Well, I believe that the prodigies are using the cerebellum for their memory, and we use our cortexes. And so that kind of information is why an elephant never forgets, why you never forget to ride a bike. It's really motor memory, but I believe that their motor wiring and circuitry is really pronounced back in their cerebellum, where we put things we don't ever want to forget.
Kimberly, tell us about Greg Grossman, whom you call in the book the tiniest chef. What's his story?
So Greg is great. He has been fascinated by food, again, since he was, almost a toddler. Like, they would go to restaurants and he would stand on his chair to try to see into the kitchen and see what the chefs were doing. Around the time he was 4, he started experimenting in the kitchen. They'd go to the grocery store and he would tell his mom, don't buy that, it's not in season, we need this special produce. And his interest just really ballooned from there as he got interested in molecular gastronomy and more complicated recipes. And he has run, different kitchens. He's only, I think now he's 21, and he was off like a shot and interested in food and loved everything about it.
And you call him the tiniest chef because?
Because he was cooking when he was so tiny. He was 4 years old. I actually remember him coming to our house when he was a bit older than that, but even then he must have been, I think, probably a preteen, and watching him just come into my parents' kitchen and start immediately chopping, and he has all these recipes in his mind, and to watch him work was awesome. And I remember distinctly my mom asking him for one of his recipes, and he said, "Oh, you don't need me to write it down for you. You'll remember," which I think was another great clue to the amazing memory that these kids have.
Speaking of which, Joanne, I want to go out on a bit of a tangent with you here, and that is people of a certain generation, namely mine, will remember Dustin Hoffman in the movie Rain Man,
yes,
where he was, I guess, what's called an autistic savant, and was able to count the number of matchsticks that were dropped on the floor exactly right to the hundreds.
Yes.
Who knew the estimated time of arrival of Qantas airline flights in Australia, all of this kind of thing. What's the difference between a child prodigy and an autistic savant?
An autistic savant shows problems with daily living, so they have deficits that are apparent, where the child prodigies do not have the deficits, but they are both using, I believe, the same part of their cerebral cortex and their cerebellum to process the information. It's just that they've received a gene that has become too much information, and they're oversensitive to stimuli.
Did you see Rain Man?
Yes.
I figured you must have seen it. How accurate a depiction did Dustin Hoffman do of that kind of person?
Actually, that was done about Kim Peek's and Dr. Donald Treffert's patient, and it was a combination of people that he had in his practice, but he actually was a human being, and it was accurate to that point, or bits and pieces of his personality and other autistic savants. And they are like that. They can memorize the phone book, they can memorize pi, those that are verbal, and they have these extraordinary memories. Treffert says if you find a savant, you find an extraordinary memory.
Kimberly, a question following up on this issue of memory. The memory of an adult expert versus the memory of a child prodigy. How would they be different?
Yeah, so it's this really interesting thing where, Greg, for example, has a great memory when it comes to food, when it comes to cooking. And in that way, he is very closely aligned to an adult expert, because it's really well established in the academic literature that adult experts have enhanced memory when it comes to their particular field. So if it was an adult, chess master, that person might have a great memory for past chess games. But it's pretty equally well established that that enhanced memory doesn't expand to everything for adults, that it's limited to facts that are relevant to their specialty. Whereas for the child prodigies, their memories are actually quite incredible even outside their area of expertise. So one of the things that my mom did that was really innovative in working with these kids was she gave them all IQ tests, and they all score in the 99th percentile in memory. And when they take those tests, they're not, answering questions about recipes, or if you're an artist, you're not answering questions that would draw on your memory as an artist. These are sort of more random facts, and really show that they have this incredible firepower in general when it comes to their memories.
Joanne, let me ask you if maybe Kimberly is referring to the same thing I'm about to ask, because I guess it was in 2001, you sent a questionnaire out to many of the families with child prodigies. And I guess we need to know a little bit more about what that questionnaire was all about.
I sent out the AQ by Baron Cohen, and it is a instrument. It's a self-survey where you take questions like, sometimes when I'm on the telephone, I don't know when it's my turn to talk. So if you check yes for that, you get a point for autism. And it correlates with the ADOS, which is the gold standard for diagnosing autism, at a point, I believe it's 8.5 if you get a 32, and I think it's a 0.95 if you get a 36. And so that's how we established that they were also giving attention to detail, because that's one of the categories of the AQ. There's 5 different categories: social skills, communication, imagination, open to new experiences, and what's the other one? I'm forgetting. Repetitive behaviors.
Repetitive behaviors. Okay, I'm making a bit of a checklist of my own here, Kimberly. Extreme memory, attention to detail. What other traits would child prodigies share with autistic children?
Oh, the passionate interests. This desire to pursue a particular area that can almost feel all-consuming, that you're so interested in it and so drawn to it.
So would you call that passionate interest, or would we call that obsession?
Right. So that's a really good question, and it seems like a pretty thin line. And I think to give an example among the prodigies where that was really evident quite early is Autumn DeForest, who's this wonderful artist. And when she was quite young, you know, her parents thought she might be a musician. Her dad's a musician. She had this great rhythm, great pitch. So they signed her up for piano lessons. And when she looks back on that time, she describes herself as a totally willing student. It was fun. She liked it. But it wasn't until she was 5 and she went outside and found her dad staining furniture, and she asked if she could try too. So he gave her a piece of wood, he gave her some paint, and he said, you know, go ahead. And it just totally clicked for her. And after that, she started painting every day after kindergarten for hours at a time. She started asking for books by and about famous artists. And by the time she was 7, she was showing her work, and soon thereafter she was selling it. And it's really become her lifelong passion in an extraordinary way.
And we think there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, presumably every parent loves their kid to be, whatever this word means, but normal, right? Not obsessed with any one particular thing. Having this obsession's okay?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think we celebrate it. We think it's tremendous that she's found this thing that she loves and can focus on it for so devotedly.
So, Joanne, do you conclude that there is a genetic link between autism and being a child prodigy?
Well, in our study, in our first DNA study that was published in Human Heredity, we do find a genetic link on chromosome 1 between the autistic individuals and the child prodigies in their family.
I want to give an example of this. We had, I'm trying to think how many years ago, it was a few years ago anyway, Jacob Barnett on our program. He currently studies at, you're nodding your head because I know you know him, he's in your book. He's now studying at the Waterloo, Ontario Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. And, well, I guess it goes without saying that I'd never met anybody like him before in my life, and still haven't. So let's play a clip of him, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape.
Okay.
Most people, I think, are not happy to be autistic.
Well, I'm very happy to be autistic.
You are happy about it?
Yes.
Why?
Without being if I was not autistic, I would not be at the place I am right now. Autism is my way of thinking, it's my way of viewing the world, and it's because of that that I'm able to do what I'm able to do best.
Now, Kimberly, my hunch is most people who have autism or their families would not say that they're happy they have it. Would I be right about that?
I think there's a real mix. I mean, I think autism obviously can come with some very serious challenges, both for the individual and for the families. But I think you do find people who recognize the strengths that can come with autism and kind of take an approach that's more, you know, you love the kid you get, and you're helping that kid develop just like you'd help any kid. Because,
Joanne, of examples like Jacob's, do you think our understanding or our, no, not understanding, our feelings or our, I can't find the right word I want to use here, but the way we think about autism, do you think it's changing over the years?
I think it is changing, and I think it's been changing. I think people like Temple Grayson and others who are arguing to train the talents, certainly Jacob's mother, Christine Barnett, are saying find that child's passion, and instead of trying to force them to look you in the eye when that's very uncomfortable for them, have them work with what it is they're obsessed about, and the other things will trail along because they'll want to start talking about them.
I guess the thing that we have to overcome is this notion that autism is somehow less of something. You know, that's been the attitude. It's if you have autism, you are less able to do such and such. But instead, maybe we've got to think there's more there as opposed to less. Is that fair?
Well, I think we want to recognize the strengths along with the deficits, because there's both for most people.
Kimberly, how does this newer theory of autism, in your view, draw the link closer between autism and being a child prodigy?
Yeah, so there's this really interesting, you know, relatively new theory of autism called the intense world theory. And it's very much like what you said. The idea here is that the autistic brain is actually supercharged. You know, there's many neurons making many connections and really making the autistic brain have more sensitivity to many things that can both lead to heightened perception on the one hand that might contribute to this sort of excellent attention to detail that can often come with autism, and also make social interactions in some ways more difficult because you might instead of, some people have thought that maybe autism meant a lack of empathy, but actually rather than a lack of empathy, you're feeling other people's emotions so strongly that it makes it difficult to communicate with them, and in some ways you might explain autistic withdrawal in those situations. And I think that theory really encompasses both the challenges and the strengths in a way that makes autism seem quite closely aligned with Prodigy, at least in terms of those strengths that are characteristic of both cases.
I'd like to ask people who come on this program who study the brain this question, and in our last minute, let me get a brief response from each of you on this. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being we don't know a damn thing and 10 being we know it all, where are we right now, do you think, on these issues that we've talked about over the last 20 minutes? Kimberly, go ahead.
I think we are higher than we've ever been before. I actually really have always admired my mom for taking on this line of research. It's definitely not the easiest one to pursue. There's not so many child prodigies in the world, and I think it's headed in a really exciting direction.
Joanne, you want to put a number on it?
I don't want to put a number on it until we find out. We are working with McGill University right now. They are looking for what we call the resilience gene that allows these child prodigies to only express the talents that are associated with autism. If we find that, then I'm going to give it about a 6.
Gotcha. 6 is not bad, but it still suggests we've got a heck of a long way to go, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Interesting. Joanne Ruthsatz on the line from Columbus, Ohio. Kimberly Stephens on the line from the American capital. It's been great of both of you to come on TVO tonight and talk about your newest entry into this field, the Prodigy's cousin. Take care to you both, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.